Hello and welcome to the DecisionWise Engaging People podcast. My name is Charles Rogel, and I'm the Vice President of Consulting Services here at DecisionWise. Today I'm joined by Matt Wride, the DecisionWise President and Senior Consultant.
Hi, Charles. Thanks for having me.
Today we're going to continue our series discussing approaches to improve leadership competencies, more specifically the competency of problem solving. And so I guess to begin, let's talk about how we would define problem solving as a leadership competency and also why it's so important.
Sure. We define problem solving based on 4 behavior statements, and that's because in the process of measuring, which is what we do with 360s and other instruments, we try to give someone who's rating a leader on their problem-solving ability, we try to give them these 4 behavior statements and ask them for their feedback. Number 1, uses pertinent and relevant facts and information when solving problems. Okay, so we're looking to see how well are they using the underlying data? Are they making data-driven decisions? Number 2, looks beyond the obvious to find the underlying causes. Okay, so the ability to go deeper, the ability to see analysis happening at various levels, to look for root causes.
Not just make a quick decision.
Yeah, that's right. Number 3, the third behavioral statement is solves difficult problems with effective solutions. That's sort of outcome-based. It doesn't really help someone know how to be a better problem solver, but in evaluating that, we need to know, are they good at overcoming roadblocks?
Yeah, do they get the job done?
Right. And then do they involve others in problem solving? And that is seeking help, bouncing ideas off of others, asking others for input to avoid biases and other things that creep into our problem solving. So that's how we measure problem solving.
Yeah, so it seems pretty comprehensive. We have kind of these 4 actionable statements that we're trying to use. Normally these appear on a 360 survey as we're measuring this for a leader. Other people get to kind of chime in and rate someone on those statements as well.
Right. And it's my opinion, this is one of the most important competencies that, for me personally, here at DecisionWise, in kind of overseeing our efforts to grow and improve, finding employees that have problem-solving capabilities that are high in this area is vital. And that's because we don't hire labor anymore to sort of just do things, to process things for us. I mean, that's still a part of manufacturing facilities and other organizations that are structured that way. But in a knowledge worker economy, we're looking for people who can see a problem and then start to automatically find a way to get rid of the roadblock. And as we hire, we're looking for those people that can do that, because that means we're faster, better at responding to our clients' needs. We're better at gaining market share, all those things that we care about.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they come into an organization, if you're new especially, you just trying to learn your job and get up to speed. And you get to a point in the job or your career where you can tend to start having an opinion about things, right? You see the bigger picture, how things work, what needs fixing, efficiencies that need to happen. And so that's when you can get into problem-solving mode to really say, yeah, this isn't working right. I think I have a better idea here. Let's try to pursue this.
Right. And that is step 1, right? The ability to identify a problem is foundationally, but we don't want people to stop there.
Yeah.
And that's because anybody can point out problems. The ones that do it well go beyond identifying the problem, and they start identifying causes so that they can evaluate solutions. They start researching different ways to solve the problem. We have lots of folks that can identify problems, but it's rare when you get someone who identifies a problem and then comes preloaded with all the ideas and possible ways of solving it. Those are just gifts.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about then building competencies in general.
I am really keen on this notion called a competency-based culture. We do a lot of measurement around here. We measure organizations different ways, different sizes, and a lot of times we think culture represents the way things work around a particular place, right? Kind of what it's like to be there. I like cultures that are based on competencies and behaviors, because I think it's easier to align people to those standards than to say something aspirational. I mean, so often we'll have a set of values like drive. It's very aspirational, but if we don't go further and say, well, what does that look like? What does drive mean? And then when you further add on a behavior statement like takes initiative, comes up with, identifies new opportunities for growth. You make it much more clear to people what you're expecting of them. And so cultures that are built around competencies that are defined and measured by behaviors, I believe are fair in the sense that they let people know what we expect of them. They give us an objective measurement. And so I'm really keen on organizations building their cultures around competencies and behaviors as opposed to around aspirational statements or success, we win, or we drive change. Those things don't go deep enough.
And it's funny because you want to set a culture around specific values. And so I'll see a list of like 6 values for an organization, and they'll define them. And sometimes they'll be a little nebulous, or they might be a little aspirational, like you're saying. But once you say, well, what are the behaviors that drive that value? So once you start defining the competencies and behaviors, people get it. And then once you measure against those, all of a sudden people know what the expectations are and how they're going to be evaluated.
That's exactly right. I mean, and you do this stuff in your sleep, but that's where we add value, is we really are able to take a nebulous idea of, hey, this is a value or a concept we want to make part of our culture. Then we come in and we can help say, okay, let's get really clear about the behaviors we want to see associated with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let's talk then a little bit about some of the myths associated with problem solving.
Yeah, I think it's fun to tackle myths and sort of talk about what something is by noting what it's not. And I'll give you an analogy. We listened to a podcast a while back, and it was by someone who is trained in forgeries and detecting forgeries. And somebody says, well, you must study all sorts of forgeries all the time. And he says, no, I actually study and study and study the real thing. And when I know it so well, the forgeries pop out automatically. So
becoming a subject matter expert.
Right. And I say that, and so it's fun but I love to talk about the myths because they help us understand really what, at its core, problem solving is all about. Anyway, myth number 1, problem solving and critical thinking are the same. And that's not true. Problem solving is a subset of this notion of critical thinking. It's kind of what we talked about. You can identify an issue or a problem associated with an argument or a decision that the organization is making, but problem solving goes beyond just identifying to actually evaluating solutions, thinking of creative ways to solve the problem. Maybe you invert your thinking to work backwards from solution to problem. Those types of things are all associated with problem solving, and that's not the same thing as critical thinking.
Right.
Number 2, the second myth is good problem solvers intuitively shoot from the hip. And that's a myth. Problem solving is a skill. You can learn how to do it. You can have systems and mental models that help you become a good problem solver. And so don't think that this is just something that you know how to fix stuff. That's not how it works. Myth number 3, if you come up with a good solution, you're a good problem solver. And that's sometimes there's luck. A broken clock is right twice a day.
Right.
Right. It's the old saying. So not necessarily just because you can come up with a solution do you mean that you're a problem solver. Myth number 4, you are born with the ability to solve problems, that it's somehow an innate ability. No. 5, you must like puzzles. No. You don't have to be a puzzle person to be a problem solver. And number 6, there's only one answer to a problem, or you can only solve a problem in one way. And good problem solvers, they look at a variety of angles of attack to a problem. They're not focused on one way. They keep all their options open until they've evaluated the different scenarios. So in that sense, by discussing what problem solving is not, I think we have a better understanding what it is.
Great. So let's talk then more about the competency itself, like what it means. What does it mean to be good at this?
Okay. Yeah. The first thing that I want to talk about is something that a consulting firm, Partners in Leadership, teaches, and that is beliefs are foundational to change and to problem solving. Okay. So first, to be a good problem solver, you have to believe that you have the power, that you can affect the outcome. Yeah. You're not a victim. You also have to have a belief in the underlying solution and the reason that you need to solve the problem and all sorts of those things. You've got to have a reason to care, if you will. And you have to have confidence that what you are proposing will work. So again, you have to start with your beliefs. And if you don't believe you're a problem solver, you probably won't be a good one. And if you don't believe in the underlying mission of what you're trying to accomplish, you probably won't be a good problem solver. So make sure that you have identified your beliefs, and that those beliefs are aligned with where you want to go. Good problem solvers have a pattern. And again, I'm sourcing this material to partners in leadership, but they see it, they own it, they solve it, and they do it. In other words, it's action-oriented. That's why you don't have to be good at puzzles. It's not a game. It's not just something you sit around and do on the train as you commute to and from work. Problem solving is an activity. And you get in and you identify problems and you move things forward. Some other tips that I like to talk about is remain objective, list the obstacles that are stopping you from progressing. There's a great saying that the territory is not the map. And what I mean by that is sometimes we can think that the map represents the problem, like our conceptualization of the problem is what it really is. It's not. And so you have to be really, really good at being a great cartographer. A good problem solver is a really great cartographer or a map builder.
Okay.
You're an outdoors guy, but the better your map is, the more fun you can have.
Yeah.
And so if you want to be a great problem solver, you know everything about that problem. That's what I mean by map building. You know the nuances, the elevation gains, all of the tributaries, and all the things associated with that. And so good problem solvers are great cartographers, if you will.
And I see this happen a lot because we'll do kind of action planning sessions with clients, and we'll get into this, we'll identify what the problem is. So we have poor communication in the organization. And we'll sit down with a group of people, and everyone jumps into solutions right off the bat. So we need to do this and this and this, and they don't map out the problem effectively. So they don't identify, well, why is it not working? So we call it the current state, right? So identify what is happening now that's not working. And if you can have a longer discussion and you can pull the reins back on people from getting into problem solving immediately, they will really have dissected what the problem is first, or the issues are, get them all on the table, summarize what they are. Now they can go and problem solve. So yeah, too many times we jump headlong into coming up with ideas for solutions that are not baked well enough.
You're so right. And that's why I like to propose some sort of like a 70-30 rule. Spend 70% of the time understanding the problem, and only 30% coming up with solutions. Mm-hmm. If you just walk in and say, hey, let's list all the possibilities, you're going to spend time going down rabbit holes and things that don't matter. Whereas I loved your phrase, mapped the problem. If you've accurately mapped the problem, a lot of times the solution reveals itself.
Yeah.
So asking questions, why times 3, why? For example, a customer comes and says they don't like the platform. Well, why is that? Well, it's hard to use. Well, what does that mean? And you just keep digging down till you get to root causes, then the solution presents itself.
Because you're trying to define what problem are we trying to solve?
I think problem solving needs a system. So if you're doing it with people, you need to have a facilitator. You need to be organized. You need to list your efforts and record your experimentation. I love the idea of inverting your thinking, which is reverse engineering. Sometimes we look at a problem and we try to think of it as, how do I go from point A to B? But instead of going that way, think of how all the things you need to get to point B and then work backwards. So it's a tip of inverting your thinking. So if my desire is to have a really great training session with a group of employees, start with that, identify the ideal, and work back of all the things that you need in order to accomplish that.
Yeah.
And that will actually create a better map or a better roadmap of where you want to go than if you just say, well, okay, now we need to get a room. Now we need to get some tables.
Right.
Now I need a trainer and those things. That is working backwards from the ideal state, as you mentioned.
Like the future state. Describe your future state and how do we get there?
And that's inverse thinking. And that's where you invert your thinking to do. You've got to be open-minded. You cannot solve problems without others. You have to be rational. You have to be willing to change your mind when new information presents itself and gives you a reason to change your mind. You have to cast your ego aside and look for the good of the organization, and solving the problem is more important than getting credit. I think good problem solvers are well-versed in other areas and disciplines. They find solutions. I've seen business people find solutions in things such as biology. And what that is they'll look at an ecosystem and understand how ecosystems interact, and they'll use that understanding to say, well, that applies to my organization. That applies to how we interact as a team. So they're able to use connections between various disciplines, science, physics, and all sorts of things. One last point I really want to make is about, as I mentioned, the need to understand concepts from other fields. I wanted to give an example here how we do that here.
Yeah.
There's a principle in quantum mechanics called the observer effect.
Yeah.
That when you observe a particle, you actually can change its state.
All right.
The famous illustration is known as Schrodinger's cat's conundrum, where the cat can either be dead or alive, and you don't know that until you open the box and observe it. And once you observe it, these really weird physics takes over and alter things. We have noticed that when we measure things with leaders, they improve, not because they've actually done any work, but simply because they know they're being observed. They improve their performance.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting. We're sitting around talking about the observer effect, and we were making connections to physics, to quantum mechanics, and we sort of had that interesting insight. How much of what we do is just observer effect, and how much of it is actually identifying a problem that then a person can go address. So that's a simple example, but nonetheless an example of how we can be well-versed in other areas, and those can lead to problem solving and to better outcomes.
I like some of the points here, like enlisting other open-minded people, because sometimes I think people don't consider themselves very innovative. And so when there's a problem, they get stuck and they can't really think of some ideas. And so I say, well, you probably need to get a partner to kind of brainstorm a bit on how to solve this, or maybe your team or whatever. So again, opening it up to a group. And then there's different styles, because if you're more of an introvert, you prefer to maybe think by yourself to kind of come up with some ideas and solutions, then bounce those ideas off of other people. If you're an extrovert, ideas normally come through a group discussion. And so you're able to kind of coalesce your ideas more within a group setting as opposed to being alone.
Yeah, and that's a nice example where a facilitator who knows what they're doing can be really helpful. They may be able to send out some pre-work so introverts have time to prepare, and then they also balance that with an hour-long discussion that allows the extroverts to get in and sort of get those discussions going. So that's why facilitation is important. There's one last point sort of before we kind of tie this up. This is really vital to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Oh, yeah.
Problem solving, good problems are reliant on diverse perspectives. And so this is one way, rather than just quotas, like how many people serve in leadership, how many people's of color or things like that, you want to make a real difference from diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Enlist others as part of problem solving. So gather their perspectives, listen to their solutions, because I'm amazed of nuances and sort of background information that I didn't even know, because I didn't realize that a word meant something different to a particular person of color or things. And so good problem solving is relying on perspectives, and then this is therefore reason why diversity, equity, and inclusion matters, and this is a good area to make some gains.
That's a really good point. So as we're talking about this, what are some of the, like as you're trying to teach problem solving, what are challenges there? What do people get hung up on?
So there's no formula you can follow for problem solving. And I liken it to someone who learns how to be a good writer. The best way to be a good writer is to be a voracious reader. And just by consuming so many different types of writing yourself, you begin to see patterns and styles, and you can take what you like from one area. Same thing with music. We're sitting here with Jake, our producer here. Jake's a great musician, partially because he consumes all types of genres of music.
Sure.
Well, problem solving is the same thing. You should study people who solve problems. You should look at how problems are solved. You should engage in after-action reviews where you go back and process and digest what went wrong and how did we fix it.
Yeah.
You have to become a student of the actual discipline of problem solving, and that's, in my view, really the only way to learn it. There's no great formula.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed is most leaders, as we're like debriefing or coaching leaders on 360 results, are pretty good problem solvers, right? So as an individual contributor, you were good at fixing things, getting things done, solving problems, which got you promoted. And now you're kind of in this position to help others solve problems, but also to kind of remove roadblocks for your team.
Yeah.
So that is one of your kind of core skills, is to help keep things running efficiently, taking out the difficulties or the barriers out of people's paths.
And your point is right. And this is why we say you can't just go cherry pick your favorite competencies and think that that's a great assessment or that's a good competency culture.
Yeah.
To your point, managing change and problem solving go together because managing change is the final step of problem solving, if you will. And so that's why you have to think about how your competencies are interrelated and not just say, I'm a fan of decision making, I'm a fan of communication. You need to think, well, how do they fit together to create the type of leader that will transform this organization?
Really good point. Excellent. Well, Matt, thank you very much for the insight here on problem solving. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we look forward to having you join us on our next Engaging People podcast.
Thanks, guys.